The African American's Search for Truth and Knowledge by Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Jr. This work sets out to destroy the myths and misconceptions that have shadowed the story of Africa and her people. For 200 years, education in the Western world was European-centered, teaching one people's history as if it were the history of all. Jeffries answers with a broader, truer record, tracing African Americans from the cradle of humanity through forced migration, resistance, and rebellion to the building of their own enduring institutions in America. The search for truth, Jeffries argues, must be global. It cannot be limited to the experience of white European Americans, because non-European peoples make up 9/10 of the world's population and shaped the very growth of America. He aims to correct false images and erase the omissions that have hidden the African American contribution. His central frame is a cyclical pattern of response to the American system: accommodation, separation, and rebellion, recurring with special intensity in the wake of every major military struggle, from the Revolution to the Civil Rights era.
Part 1. Africa, the continent of light. Before the chains and the ships, there was the homeland, the place where humanity itself began.
New scientific discoveries have forced the world to abandon its old, narrow view of Africa. The hominid line leading to modern humans has been traced back more than 4 million years, almost entirely on African soil. In 1925, a young skull was found at Taung in South Africa, and after 1959, Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania placed Africa at the head of the human family. Dr. Leakey's find, Zinjanthropus, was dated to roughly 1,750,000 years. Charles Darwin had predicted it. Our earliest progenitors lived on the African continent. Africa is no jungle. Rainforest covers less than 10% of the continent. The rest is desert, temperate zone, highland, and vast grassland savanna that carried the migrations of peoples and herds. Across this diversity runs a deep cultural unity. Over 1,000 languages group into 4 great families, yet the values endure: communal, cooperative, and collective. The individual is honored as a spiritual extension of the ancestors, remembered in the ritual of libation. This humanism stands in sharp contrast to the unbridled individualism and ruthless competition of the European American value system. Africa holds the world's great river systems: the Nile, Niger, Congo, and Zambezi. The Nile flows 4,000 miles from the Great Lakes to the Mediterranean, its annual flood feeding the earliest civilization. Grains and cattle were domesticated here thousands of years before Asia, and 33 royal tombs in Nubia date back more than 5,300 years, the oldest known monarchy on Earth. Along the Niger, the medieval empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai traded gold across the Sahara and built the University of Sankore at Timbuktu, while Europe endured its dark ages. Part 2. Chains across the Atlantic. The shameful truth that dominates every other question. Africans came to the Americas in bondage. Africans came to the Americas in chains, in the single most sustained injustice since the dawn of history. The triangular trade linked Europe, Africa, and the Americas for more than 450 years. Jeffries names the true cause plainly: not any civilizing mission, but greed and racism. Unlike older Arab or African captivity, European American slavery reduced the human being to chattel, mere property like cattle. Even Jefferson and Washington profited and would not surrender that wealth for freedom's ideals. So the nation was, in his words, compromised from birth, a permanent birth defect on the altar of slavery.
American history is full of irony. The first Africans to settle permanently in British North America were sold to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, arriving before the Mayflower as indentured servants because legalized slavery had not yet been organized. By the 1640s, a free African community of property owners grew along the Pungoteague River on Virginia's eastern shore. Men like John Johnson claimed land under the headright system. Even as new laws hardened a permanent slave status, this free African population kept expanding, becoming the base on which the institutions of today's African American community would be built.
Part 3: Resistance, Petition, and Rebellion. From the slave ship to the courtroom, the response was never silence. Resistance is a central theme rooted deep in the African and American past, long before the 1960s. Jeffries identifies 3 recurring patterns. Accommodation uses petition and protest within the rules of the system. Separation builds barriers. Emigration, migration, or a separate way of life. Rebellion answers injustice with politicized violence. The accommodation tradition began in 1644, when 11 Africans in New Amsterdam petitioned the Dutch and won their freedom, a tradition carried forward by Douglass, Du Bois, and Martin Luther King Jr. across the centuries. Out of the Revolutionary era emerged the 3 great institutions of the African American community: the church, the school, and the fraternal order. Black Baptist and Methodist congregations took root in the 1760s and 70s. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones founded their African Society in Philadelphia in 1787 after racial insults drove them from the white church. Prince Hall, born in Barbados, founded African Lodge No. 459 and won schools for black children in Boston. These institutions survived war and exile, transplanting to Canada, the West Indies, and Africa itself. When the British evacuated after the Revolution, over 14,000 African Americans left the United States. Many ex-slaves who had answered Lord Dunmore's call to fight for the King's cause, wearing the words "Liberty to Slaves" across their chests. Thousands sailed to Nova Scotia, where promises of land went unkept. Their leader, Thomas Peters, a black Moses, carried their grievances to London. There, the abolitionists offered a new home. On January 16, 1792, 15 ships bore 1,190 souls to Freetown, Sierra Leone, the first great reverse migration to the motherland. As cotton became king and the enslaved population swelled toward 4 million, resistance sharpened. Harriet Tubman, the Black Moses of the railroad, made 19 trips south and freed over 300. Frederick Douglass escaped Maryland to become the towering voice of abolition, urging Lincoln to make the war a crusade against slavery and rallying more than 180,000 black soldiers to the Union cause. The rebellion tradition burned in Denmark Vesey's thwarted Charleston plot and in Henry Highland Garnett's fiery call for the enslaved to rise.
Part 4. From Slavery to Public Service. The leaders who rose from bondage to remake a nation, and the hidden hands that built its industry.
The Civil War forged a new political leadership. Robert Smalls, an enslaved pilot, sailed a Confederate ship to the Union fleet in 1862, then served 12 years in Congress and championed free public schooling in South Carolina. 22 African Americans served in Congress between 1870 and 1901. But white supremacy struck back through fraud, grandfather clauses, and violence. By 1901, George H. White gave his farewell address as the last of his era. Du Bois answered, founding the Niagara Movement and the NAACP. Education became a sacred mission. Booker T. Washington built Tuskegee on industrial and practical training, inspiring disciples like Elizabeth Evelyn Wright, founder of Voorhees, and Mary McLeod Bethune. Du Bois, the first African American to earn a Harvard doctorate, favored a classical education to prepare a talented 10th to lead the race. More than 100 black colleges rose from the ashes of slavery. In a 1900 survey, 53% of black college graduates were teachers, a measure of how central learning was to the struggle for freedom.
African Americans were the hidden contributors to America's industrial greatness. George Washington Carver, born enslaved, drew 300 products from the peanut and sweet potato and refused to patent his gifts from God. Granville Woods, the Black Edison, held over 60 patents and turned down a partnership with Edison himself. Lewis Latimer perfected the carbon filament. Jan Matzelager's Laskin machine remade the world's shoe industry. Daniel Hale Williams performed the first successful open-heart surgery in 1893. Yet racism stripped most of them of lasting wealth from their genius. By 1900, 90% of African Americans still lived in the rural South. Then the boll weevil, Klan terror, and the labor demands of World War I pulled millions north in the Great Migration, building Harlem and Chicago's South Side. After World War II, the movement surged again, even as white flight and redlining created what Jeffries calls a white suburban noose around black inner cities. The 1968 Kerner Report warned of two societies, one white, one black, separate and unequal, and Paul Robeson stood as the Renaissance man of an awakening people.
From the Olduvai Gorge to the halls of Congress, Dr. Jeffries traces an unbroken thread, a people whose response to bondage and exclusion has been to resist, to build, and to remember. The cyclical pattern of accommodation, separation, and rebellion runs through every chapter of their story. The search for truth and knowledge is itself an act of liberation. To correct the record, to restore Africa to the head of the human family, and to recognize the African American as an enduring ethical and moral barometer of the American creed.